You're listening to Unfiltered with Muhammad Uncut, a podcast about personal growth and authentic leadership. If you're looking for tips on how to manage others, get ahead, and make your way up the corporate ladder, this is not the show for you. This podcast is about being of service to others, leading from the heart, and evolving into a better version of yourself. Each episode brings you motivated stories about unfiltered leadership and authentic leaders, those who involve others, use their influence to amplify diverse perspectives, and inspire teams to achieve collective results. If this sounds like you, keep listening.
Good day and welcome to the Unfiltered Podcast. This podcast is about transformation, how we transform into the leaders that we want to become. I have an unfiltered leader with me today, somebody who works with youth and athletes to help them connect with their mind, their body, and their fusion. And it's all about resilience, and we're going to hear about that from Matthew Caldaroni. Welcome to my podcast. I had to get the Italian in there, Matthew. Can you tell?
I can tell. I appreciate it, Mohammed. That's good, though. You know what? Introducing the roots right away is always a positive start to things. So I love that.
Well, the conversation we were having just before I hit record was, we're in Canada, and normally we butcher words, but my background is translation and a linguist. So if I couldn't say Caldaroni, then there's a problem, right? And exactly. I do love Italy. So I had the pleasure of visiting Italy several times, and I'm sure that your roots will make it into our conversation. Matthew, welcome, and thank you so much for being my guest today.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. I love your brand. I love your youthfulness. I love what you're bringing to the discussion with the people that you're working with, because people are going to say, well, wait a minute, you're talking to somebody here about athletics and somebody about sports. I say, yes, because we, in order to become the best version of ourselves, to become the inspired human beings that we need to become, it's an evolution. Every single day we aspire to be better than we were 2 hours ago, not just enough to be better than we were yesterday. I have to be better than the 600 calorie frappuccino that I had 2 hours before talking to you today. So guilt. But it's about better mind. So how do we take the knowledge that we have and learn it and use it and share it so that we can become better humans, better people to work with others? How do we take the idea that our bodies need to be temples and for our souls and for our energy? And how do we use that? How do we fuse it together so that we become more integrated individuals? And we have to be healthy. And I have a feeling when you talk about resilience, you're also talking about the sort of a resilience that we need to get off our chairs, get outdoors, get indoors, but get out and do something. So you tell me who Matthew is all about and what you do.
Absolutely. And I want to say too, I love the fact that you talked about that diversity piece that you brought up there, because it's so, getting into our brand, to keep it simple. So what we do with athletes essentially, and, people all over the world, not just athletes, but high performers, is we help them build the trait of resilience. Mohammed, it's something that, it's been deemed as a mental skill, when in reality, as well as I do, if you look at some of the most resilient or adaptable people in the world, it's a lifestyle. And, it's not one of those cliche influencer lifestyles that I'm talking about either. But you look at some of the best leaders in the world, right? You look at the Tom Brady's of the sports. You look at the Steve Jobs. You look at, hey, let's look at what's happening right now with COVID going on, right? Like this whole idea of people that can adapt. It's not just adapting your business plan. It's not just adapting the way that you think in sports. It's adapting your life to what's happening, right? So the way that this kind of all came to be, I used to be a professional soccer player. I briefly played for a couple months with Toronto FC. And then I actually ended up, homegrown. And then I actually ended up going to Europe and playing in my mother's family's hometown in Cosenza. And I'll be honest with you, when I was a youth athlete at about 12 years old, I had a coach who told me I couldn't do it. And right there, it was like, you know what, you should quit the sport. You shouldn't try this pro thing. It's not going to happen. And for someone that was 12, that was a bit of a kick in the face. And that's honestly when this whole resilience thing started, because, for me, I kept a journal, which is, I'll talk about a little bit later on, but started about talking about the things that I would do in order to separate myself from the athlete and the person. and be able to adapt and all that. And then that got me eventually a scholarship when I was 17 to go to school at Ontario Tech U. And then I decided, hey, you know what, like, let's turn it up another notch. And that's when I went to TFC for about 2 months and then hopped to Europe. And that's where I noticed, though, you know, this whole side on resilience and this lifestyle, if you will, it all came into play, because unfortunately, when I was there, I didn't have the mental wherewithal to keep pushing. The hardest part was being a kid who couldn't speak the language as well as I wanted, and being the outsider on the team. And then, you know, I'll never forget the day that it was tough, because at 19 years old, I knew it was over. Like, I hate to say it, but I just knew it. And I was looking in a mirror in my cousin's hotel room where I was staying at the time, and I just started crying, because I knew, like, I couldn't have this breakthrough that I needed in the sport. I had every capability. I saw the different sports psychologists I need to. I tried the different self-help books and all that stuff. And to me, it was almost a site of realization that I wasn't going to continue in the sport, but a realization that I have an opportunity to help athletes never fall into a slump like I did. So that led me back home, came home, finished school, and said, you know, sports psychology, it was not necessarily for me. I wasn't into the clinical side of things. I was into the side of what I needed, essentially, which was a person to show me the skills to get to that next level, but not for one day. Like, my big thing was, I was great on my diet, for example, when I was an athlete, for one day. I was great at pushing myself for one day, and it was frustrating. So I figured, you know, I must not be the only one going through this. And that's when we started studying certain things like, you know, stoicism, which we started to notice there was that great Marcus Aurelius who started understanding this idea behind, you know, simple things to push himself. And then we looked into the common sports psych practices and noticed it all had to do with clinical telling you your feelings about what you had to do, but it neglected connecting the mind and the body. And to me as an athlete, that was insanity, because it's like, well, how do you mean to tell me that I'm supposed to be able to get myself in a great mental state and then I drop off? Like, there has to be something more. So that led us on this amazing path. Going back to it, went to the journal where I was keeping this log of everything that I was doing, and noticed that it was actually some mental skills and lifestyle habits and terms behind it. So in short, we put the science to it, came up with an amazing system that we now use with just over 5,300 athletes, or individuals, I should say. And it's awesome. Like, it's something that I've noticed where we're able to help people get to the true meaning behind it. It's not just a therapy session. It's more about taking action, like you're talking about. So we've been doing this now for the last 5 years. I say we, my brother and I, and it's been awesome, man. Like, it's really more than just helping somebody. It's really helping people find their true potential, to discover their true potential with what they have to do.
Well, I don't know what's more amazing, how articulate you are and driven, and your energy, or the fact that at 12 you kept a journal, or the fact that somebody told you that you couldn't do it, right? So I don't know where I want to start there, but where I will start is, I'll go back to what I said earlier, your energy and your drive. And that is something critical in us learning to be better human beings, better, stronger, more connected, you know, more aware of ourselves and our environments and the people that we need to work with. And when life throws us a curveball, or when, you know, somebody kicks us a ball that, you know, I'm not a soccer player. I watch my kids play soccer, right? So I can't take the analogy to, you know, somebody kicks a ball in your face, maybe, you know, how do you stay standing, right? How do you make sure that it doesn't knock you over? I'm thinking at 12, somebody tells you you're done. At 19, you come to the realization maybe you're done, but you didn't pack it up. Yep. You actually just rebranded. And I'm going to talk about rebranding in a moment, because again, I think there's a story here about rebranding, but you talk about resilience, and you talk about the need for us to be resilient, and what human being going through a bunch of shit doesn't need to put their stuff together and say, you know what? I'm not going to stay down. I'm not going to fall and get trampled by my own ego, or by my lack of confidence, or by what people say or don't say. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pull myself up. I'm going to rise one rung at a time, and I'm going to do it. And listening to you and the positivity in your message and in your voice, I have no doubt that's how you work with 5,300 plus counting, and let's make it 20,000, whatever, right? Because that message that we need to become more holistic in how we approach how we're getting things done. A lot of us focus on, I'm good at, I don't know, I'm good at computer programming, so I sit in front of my computer all day. Or I'm good at playing soccer, so I play soccer all day. But life is more than just, we're very duplicative, right? We have to do many things.
Yeah.
How do you bring that level of awareness that it's not just one thing that we're meant to do, that we can actually evolve and be a lot more, where we're a lot more than just face value? How do you bring that into the conversations that you're having and into the evolution that you push people on?
You know, it's funny because going back to a couple things, like the first thing that we have to look at, especially with resilience, where I think a lot of people get it wrong. Again, in my industry that I'm in, a lot of people say that resilience is a mental skill. I really, really have a tough time accepting that. And I argue that a lot because it's like, think about this for a sec. How is resilience a mental skill if resilience means you're adapting to something? So there has to be something you're adapting to. So let's talk about drive for a sec, okay? So a lot of people think that drive is a purpose and so on. And yes, that's definitely part of it. But think of what it really means to be driven towards something. It means you have some sort of a vision, end goal, mission, whatever you want to call it, in mind. You can't be resilient without a vision. It's just impossible, right? Because think about it. It could be a small vision where it's just, you know, a specific project you're working on, but there's always an end goal in sight. And often when we see or experience athletes or even business professionals, because, you know, we do a lot of coaching on the corporate side where people are just lost. It's like, well, what's your vision? It's like, well, what do you mean? What's my vision? It's like, what are we working towards here? Because that's where I think a lot of people miss it, right? So starting on that side is a big one, but even looking at connecting the body, like if we're talking about now working towards a vision, yes, you can have an amazing mind, but if we're talking about hitting true potential, like really tapping into human potential, let's take the classic athlete story. Super skilled athlete, super talented, but they have emotional instability. And what ends up happening? They get demonized by teams, press, media, coach, everything. So we know that we can't work only with the body. We have to connect the mind. And then let's talk about it on the other side, the computer programmer, right? You're an amazing computer programmer, somebody that predominantly uses their mind, but your body isn't going to be there to support you and hold you up the whole time. How are we tapping into true human potential? We're not, right? We often look at it as results. And yes, results are beyond important. But if we're talking about sustained results, it's a completely different conversation we're having now, because it's not so much just about bursts of energy and exercise. It's a matter of long-term, consistent, slow but hot burning fire, right? So it's really looking at the two and bringing them together, where it's understanding that it starts with a vision and it's manifested through the mind connecting with the body. It happens through that connection of going on as being a person. Right.
Well, Matthew, you know, as you said that, I'm seeing my brain fire, my synapses creating energy, and you know, the way that we work, right? Our neurons create, you know, like there's energy, and what's going on is there's movement. And so if you have knowledge but you don't put it into action, well, we know that's it's a story of Hamlet, right? Like you've got great ideas, but you do nothing with it. So you're stuck there and you don't move forward, right? And the little engine that could, if it didn't keep going, it wasn't going to go anywhere, right? And so a lot of the times, you know, we focus, if we're driven by our physical prowess, then we think it's all about what I have. But I love the example that you give, because you could be the most talented athlete, but if you can't speak with others, and it's not just about being talented because I know how to kick the ball or I've got that agility and I know how to move and right. But if I can't speak, if I can't converse with others, if I can't create relationships, if I can't work with the people, you know, how many athletes you see that shine, but they don't know how to pass the ball, for example, right?
Yep.
And so they just keep running down the field and they think it's all about them and right? But it's a team sport, and life is a team sport. And the way that we work is it's a team effort between our minds and our body. And I guess you know that better than I do, right? Because this is what you do all the time. But that fascinates me, because we do tend to put ourselves into these bubbles and we think, this is my strength, I'm going to focus on my strength. And we forget that, well, what's my weakness and how do I get better? Does that approach, you know, make its way into your communication and your strategy?
Totally. It's funny because we talk about the only way to get to the top is to truly innovate yourself, right? And that's a whole principle we have behind resilience. Like, think about it. It's adaptation. And I mean, it takes no genius to go read, for example, let's say Tony Robbins' works, right? One of the best out there at what he does. It's like he kind of talks about how no real decision, for example, comes to life without taking action on it. Where I think a lot of people don't understand it, though, and kind of drop the ball, we're in this perfect culture, right? Perfect hyphenated culture where it's like things go one way and we look to our role models, right? I know in the business world, a lot of startup entrepreneurs look to the great Steve Jobs. And it's like, man, that was perfect road and perfect scenario. And it's like, okay, but man, look, like, let's really study this guy for a second. Let's really look at it. Kicked out of his own company, voted off the board, almost went bankrupt at one point, 3 months away from going to it. Right? You want to talk about perfection. I think we've got to erase that, because if we're looking at being perfect and always innovating and finding problems to be better with ourselves, perfect is the lowest standard that you could have for yourself, right? Like, that means there's no more work. That means we're done. That means it's over. And when you stop working, as well as I do, you stop growing, nothing happens, right? If your muscles don't grow, you don't get fitter. If you don't work on your mental skills, you don't get mentally tougher. It's the simple things that I think a lot of people don't realize. And we've almost demonized weaknesses instead of made them what they actually are. Again, being
opportunities for growth.
Right. Like, athletic background on my end, the great Jaromir Jagr, a hockey player, somebody who came into the NHL, for example, at 20 years old, being a specific skill kind of guy, is now playing at 40 some odd years old in Europe, playing the exact opposite game that he did. Imagine if you told him that, playing an aggressive game was a weakness. He would have been done. He wouldn't have been able to go this far. Look at Tom Brady. Even Tom Brady was a guy who was beyond athletic at the start and now found a way to adapt and use strength more. It's all adaptation. Even in the business world, it's like, think of the CEO who starts as a CEO operator at one point and then eventually gets into a more managing side of it and just the CEO side. You have to learn how to adapt. Being able to let go of the vine itself is an adaptation, right?
So how do I adapt? How do we adapt?
I think again, people don't realize is adaptation always starts with a new vision. And then it comes with a heavy assessment of the skills that you currently possess and a heavy assessment of the skills that you want to possess. And I think where people get it wrong is they think all at once it's going to happen. When if you look at the average growth period for some people in certain, we could call it professions, there's different standards for every profession you go into. Like, I know, for example, being an expert on the athlete side, if I have an athlete who's completely flipping their role around and let's say go into a more or a less athletic role that they have in a more aggressive role, it's probably going to take them about 3 months to learn those 3 base skills that they need. But we always correlate it in saying, okay, so if you need to learn 3 new skills to fit into your role, give it 30 days, right? Like, being able to adapt means an assessment and being patient in the process. Because I think a lot of people miss that. The key to high performance really is being able to slow things down, because what do we want to do as high performers? We go and we go and we go, right?
But we live in such an immediate world. Everything is immediate. I connect with you. It's all about immediacy, right? And what makes this even more difficult, Matt, because I get excited listening to you and it makes a lot of sense. But then I look at Joe over here and he's doing it 10 times better than I am, right? And maybe I forget to look at Ed over here and he thinks I'm doing it 10 times better. But it's this shiny object that somebody's always having the one up on us and doing it better. And then we get into this whole keeping up with the Joneses. Well, I can't do it. Yep. Right. And so now I can't even think about adapting because I'm frozen. I stagnate. I'm not growing. And what are my standards? What am I measuring myself against, right? And do I have some coach telling me you're over, right? So I've got nobody to push me up and to tell me that I can go to the next level. So what do I do?
I love that you asked that, because it's very simple and it's one saying that I hope fixes everybody's issue with this. Validate through the process, not through others.
Repeat.
So validate through the process, not through others. So basically what it's saying is, listen, a lot of people, so we hear about the rags to riches story, right? And we know from scientific literature and research that nurture has a lot more of an effect than nature does now. So we know that environment plays a big role. Where a lot of people get it wrong, though, is they assume that the person's the environment and don't actually look at the process as the environment. So, people that don't have, let's say, and you brought it up at the start of the podcast, but people that don't have, let's say, a coach to push them or a sounding board. Let's pretend you're at your ends with, you're finding yourself at the lowest possible point in your career. And, you know, it's just like no one's around you to support you. Well, what do? You validate off the process. Well, where was I yesterday? Oh, man. Okay. So I made 2 or 3 decisions yesterday. Hopefully you journaled those decisions and you wrote about them, or you're keeping a log somehow of understanding what it was. And then you go back to it and be like, okay, so I did these 2 yesterday. I noticed that today I'm having a podcast with Mohammed. Great. That's a step. Yesterday, nobody was listening to me. Now one person is, right? So it's a lot of people look at it as, well, that person's podcast, you know, especially in the podcasting world, Joe Rogan is signed a $500 million deal with Spotify, right?
But where was he 10 years ago?
Exactly.
Right?
It's validating off the process. So I think a lot of people have to realize that's what adaptation is, because your process, like, we have to study history to know where the hell we're going. It just, you can't do it any other way. Right.
Powerful. You know, I'm trying to, as you said that, and it's about the process and comparing ourselves to others. We don't see when others are broken. We just see the shiny object. We just see that, hey, Matt's rocking it. He's doing really good, right? You know, Steve Jobs is rocking it. Look what he's done, right? We don't see, as you mentioned, people have their adversity. People have gone through shit to get to the, you know, the mountains that they're climbing on, or the summit that they reach, you know, they were carrying those mountains on their back before, right? And so at what point were they able to kind of yank off that weight and just put it beneath them and stand on it and get to the next level, right? And sometimes, you know, I'm trying to remember, there's a female speaker. She's incredibly gifted. I think she was on some live TV show. The name escapes me, but she did a Facebook post a few weeks ago. She's broken. She's talking about how she moved from California to a small town, I think in New Hampshire, because her son, 14-year-old, is going to a new school. And she was broken. She's talking about she knows nobody there. COVID, you know, anyone who's in the speaking business, that's in part what I did as well. COVID means that nobody's speaking live anymore, the whole speaking business, and nobody's going to pay for you to go virtual. Not everybody's going to get paid for going virtual, right? And so these speakers now really have no income. Yeah. So she's talking about just how her new business paradigm is no business paradigm, right? And so you talk about adapting, right? You talk about, you think that you have some sure footing beneath you, but then the rug that you're standing on is consistently being pulled from underneath you. And that's a powerful fall that we're experiencing ongoing. So how does resilience and adapting play into this, Matt?
You know, because it's a lot of people find themselves on that treadmill effect sometimes, right? And it's really hard, where it's like you're always keeping up and keeping up and keeping up. It's a mix of perspective and understanding that nothing lasts forever, good or bad. But it's also, I think, what a lot of people don't look at this whole situation, like I know, just talking to you, even, for example, Mohammed, and you going back and forth with me, the idea of something new is exciting enough, right? And I feel like a lot of people don't understand that this might be an amazing time. And I know people have said it before, but to reinvent your own wheel. And it's not reinventing the world's wheel, but your own. Like, when was the last time you friggin' checked your standards? When was the last time that you spoke to yourself and understand what you wanted, right? Maybe you're in the business that you created and you've been just running for 15 years over and over and over again. Like I said before, the key to high performance, to resilience, is to be able to slow things down. We have been given a slowdown. And I'll tell you personally, from our own, you know, my brother and I, our company, we completely pivoted during a time like this. Not in a way that, you know, we were losing clientele per se, but just a whole messaging behind the brand. Like, we cleaned up, we took care of what was seamlessly missing for the last, I don't know, maybe 2 years. And it's like, it's being able to deal with what you have right now. And it's going to happen sometimes. You're going to have that carpet being pulled out from you all the time, the rug, whatever you want to call it. But the thing is, it's like
treadmill. I love that. Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
Sometimes you just need to let the rug be pulled, and the fall, sometimes it's the best thing that's ever happened.
And we've collectively fallen down right now, but we can choose to get up together or to climb on top of each other, right? And, you know, I think this is a collective wake-up call for all of us. How can we do it better? How can we rise together? How can we help each other? How can we motivate each other to your success doesn't have to be at my expense, or vice versa. I don't have to see you lose in order for me to win. Like we can arrive at a win-win situation, right? And you talk about reinventing and reassessing where we are. And I think that's part of adapting, right? But I think you've recently adapted as well. Like you've been in this business since you were 19, you're 27 now. I'm giving away your golden age. So you've been doing this for about 8 years, right?
Well, the company officially for 8 years. Yeah.
Okay. So tell me about, I believe you're rebranding now. And is it because of what's going on or something else? And what are you rebranding to?
You know what? I'm going to tell you this. So I wouldn't be honest if I wasn't vulnerable. So when I was a young entrepreneur, so I started this business at 22 and got very, we'll call it pro athlete blind, where I was just so caught up in that game. We were getting referrals on referrals. We did a great job. And somebody being 22, 23 who started their own company just completely put the admin stuff to the side. So we never trademarked our brand back about 5 years ago. We never put any kind of expense into it. We found that this past February, somebody actually took our name and they trademarked it out in the States. And for us, it was like, man, we can't practice all this.
That's Mind Body Fusion.
That was Mind Body Fusion. So we rebranded now to what I personally love it, because I'll be honest, I thought Mind Body Fusion, it was too long for me anyways to start with. But my brother and I put our heads together and we said, like, what's something that really has meaning? So we looked to the Latin language and we said, man, that's a language that's been around forever. Like nothing breaks that language.
Good way to look at it.
So my brother Chris is a lot more like he's a creative guy in that sense. He loves history. So he dug in and he said, man, what about the word resilience, but in Latin? And I said, yeah, I love it. So we looked it up. We found the name Molitium. And like I was explaining to you, being Canadian, a lot of people would have pronounced it Militium. So he said, well, to hell with that. Like, why don't we just spell it the way that it sounds? So we ended up doing that. And I'll be honest, it's only made our brand sexier. It's only made our brand more appealing. And it's got one of those names now that we look at it like the Nike, right? But I'll tell you this, if COVID didn't hit, we never would have had one of our colleagues, thankfully enough, who walked us through this trademark assessment. And we saw it and we're like, oh my God, we would have continued practicing on the high that we were in the public image. And we would have been practicing with this name, and that's waiting for a lawsuit to happen, So we thankfully had the reset that came in, but it's opportunity in the darkest times. Like, you can be your own light. You totally can.
And you could have chosen to stay down when you fell off the treadmill because somebody was pulling the rug from underneath you and maybe got ahead of you when you didn't think about it 5 years ago. But you know what? You can rebrand, you can adapt, and that's all part of resilience. So Molitium. So first of all, before I get to my unfiltered thought of the week, which is what I ask my guests about any sort of advice or whatever kind of, what can you do to kind of be my cheerleader, say, keep going, right? But before that, I want to ask, what does the shirt behind you represent? What is it all about?
Oh, so this year, that's, that was one of the first ever MMA fighters that we've had.
Okay.
A guy from Philly. And I've watched this young man go from somebody who was getting defeated like no end to being an absolute champion, where right before COVID, if it didn't hit, I believe he was 2 wins away from going to that next level.
Wow.
So that to me is something that always hangs with this guy, because it was the first athlete gift I was ever given, and the most humble time where I really figured out, it's something that really got to me. That we had an impact on somebody's life, so much so that they decided to send us something out of their own pocket. And that was the greatest thing. Like, we've got the jerseys and sticks now all over, but that one there means something to me a lot.
Well, I really want to see Molitium and what you and your brother Chris are doing and go to the next level, because you, without a doubt, are helping a lot of people go to the next level. And I say this because we're Canadian, but I know that a lot of us, a lot of people that I speak to on this platform who are really all about the unfiltered spirit, that we're in this together. This isn't where anyone has to shine at the expense of others. This is where we all speak well about each other. We all belong. It's about making a seat at the table where you can bring your vision, you can share it with people, you can get them excited about your brand, and you can say, you know what? How can we help? How can we make the world a better place? And at the end of the day, that's what I think it comes down to, is how can we do things better? How can we become better, right? So on that note, what can you say to my listeners to help them become better?
If you haven't taken the time yet to find out who you really are, there's no better time to do it than now. And that doesn't mean that you go on, some kind of hiatus where you completely just back out. It means really rediscovering where you were at, because I feel like so many of us had dreams as kids and let the world eat those dreams up sometimes. And what a lot of people, I think, could realize during a time like this, I mean, look around you at every single corporate structure. What you thought it used to be secure, it's not.
Nothing is secure. This life in itself is not secure. The body that we are in is not secure.
Yep.
But, this is a time for us, as you said, to reset, right? And, we can reflect and we can become more aware on how we can repurpose what we're all about and just do it better. So I want to thank you for sharing your insight, your energy, your enthusiasm, and I want to wish you the best of luck, you and your brother, on the next phase of Moleteum, and keep shining. Keep shining. Make us proud. Thank you for being my Unfiltered guest today.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Unfiltered, the show about authentic leadership and personal growth. Like what you heard? Click subscribe, share it, and tell a friend about it. And don't forget to leave a rating.